Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in. On this episode of the podcast, host Craig Jeffery interviews Todd Yoder, Global Treasury Head of Derivatives and Hedging Capital Management and Technology Strategy at Fluor Corporation, on being a Treasury learner. With the approach of focus and humility as a way to deepen knowledge, they share effective learning techniques and tactical ways to achieve success as a treasurer in today's environment. Listen in to the discussion to learn more.
Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast. This is your host, Craig Jeffery. Today's episode is on being a Treasury learner, and I'm here with a special guest speaker, Todd Yoder. He's the Global Treasury Head of Derivatives and Hedging Capital Management and Technology Strategy at Fluor Corporation. Welcome to the podcast, Todd.
Thank you, Craig. It's great to be with you.
Today's topic is on being a Treasury learner, and you had said something in a previous podcast on Mike Richards' channel, the Treasury Career Corner. And a couple of things that you said caught my attention, and I wanted to explore it further. You talked about focus and humility as a way to deepen your knowledge. And I wanted to unpack that more with today's episode. And I was very pleased to have that discussion with you a little earlier as we prepared for this. But maybe just for purposes of the audience, if you could just give a quick overview of your career, not as in depth as you did on the Treasury Career Corner, because we'll just give people a link and they can hear all about it. But give us the highlighted version of your career.
Yeah, Craig, I started my career in accounting. So I'm one of the accounting converts. So I was a controller. From there I spent some time in banking, and I worked in corporate FP&A, and then started in Treasury back in 2007, just in time for the global financial crisis of 2007 to 2009. So I've been in corporate treasury for quite a while. Worked at Fluor Corporation, which is an engineering, procurement, construction, and maintenance business. Love it. It's a great company. It's over 100 years old. We're in a lot of different business lines and very global, so we do business all over the world.
I appreciate some of the background, and I'm not surprised that you enjoy those elements of Treasury more than accounting. My formal training was accounting as well, and I don't regret it, but there's certainly a lot of areas of Treasury that are extremely interesting. But with that background, obviously you shifted from FP&A, banking controllers, and you moved into Treasury. As you think about this process of developing and learning, how ongoing development and learning has changed over time, what might be some advice you have on learning for anyone, whether they're new in their career or, midpoint or near the end stage?
Yeah, learning, I think of it like eating food. If you eat the right food, I would say be intentional. And then the third thing is know yourself. And when I say eat the right food, just like you have a diet and you eat food, and you can eat healthy food, you can eat junk food, you can overeat or undereat. Just like food is fuel for the body, I think learning is the fuel for the brain. And so, content overload, there's so much content available. Some of that content is good, some not so good. So I think of that kind of eating healthy or eating junk food. Be intentional. What I mean by that is, have a plan. Prioritize what you think is important for you to know and to learn and to expand on. I know there's conflicting views. There's a lot of books on the topic. Some say be well-rounded and focus on those areas that you don't know as much about. And then there's kind of the other side of the camp that says focus on what you do know and what you're passionate about, and and run with that and become an expert. So there's kind of conflicting views. You'll have to decide for yourself which camp you're in. And then know yourself is know how you learn best. If you have a look at VARC, it is something that I look at. It's 4 types of learning, 4 types of learners. So VARC stands for visual, auditory, reading and writing, and then physical activity. I tend to be more of an auditory. I do a lot of reading, but I tend to do more listening so that I can consume more content. If I'm on a flight for 8 to 10 hours, it's a great opportunity to do a lot of listening and to consume content that way. And then there's spatial learning, which is very hot right now, memorization, and there's some great apps for that. I find it interesting, but I haven't adapted much to those. Those are the folks that do the memorization contests and tournaments, and I find it interesting, but it's not what I do right now.
Yeah, the VARP, intentional, and the right type of food. I think we're going to come back to that too. That's the background of eating, if you will, or learning as you described it. Do you take an approach to learning that incorporates all of those intentionally? How do you approach it in the business world? Yeah, maybe you can just expand into, your approach to learning, as you you started off with your advice on it.
I do consume content that I believe will add value to what I do and my role in Treasury and finance. I also do technology and innovation at Fluor as well. Mm-hmm. And so I work across the organization with different groups. So I do focus on content that I think will add value. I do the typical treasurer, I participate a lot in the Euro Finance conferences. I've done AFP. And so I do those kind of typical things, but I also enjoy podcasts and webinars. The banks do a great job with webinars, and the service providers, there's a ton of opportunities there. The Treasury Career Corner podcast that Mike Richards does, and stories about other treasurers and their journeys, and I find that interesting. So artificial intelligence podcast, that's one Lex Friedman does from MIT. I find that one extremely interesting just because I have a passion for that area, where it's been and where it's going. And there's a number of experts in the field that Lex will interview on his podcast, and these are people that are out in front and that have studied the topic for many, many years, and some of them with MIT, but some of them, there's Ian Goodfellow. He also has neuroscientist Jeff Hawkins is one that I really like, and his theory of 1,000 brains. I also follow Hedera Hashgraph. So Lehman Baird is one of the co-founders of Hedera Hashgraph, and I followed him for a few years. Another podcast I like is IT Visionaries. So those are some areas, some methods, my approach. I would just caution, it's kind of the wild west of content, I think, out there right now. And so YouTube, you got to be a little careful with YouTube. So there's a lot of junk food on YouTube. There is some healthy food, but I would be careful with that. But I think there's just a tremendous amount of opportunities for people with focus to learn about those topics and those areas that they find interesting and that they're passionate about.
How much time are you spending a week on, let's say, listening to podcasts or webinars, let's say on the auditory side of taking stuff in?
Yeah, so I think I'm very fortunate in my role with Fluor. I have what I think is, talking to my peers, I have more time to think strategically than a lot. So I think, in my role at Fluor, I probably spend at least 20% of my time with research and being more strategic than the day-to-day, but I do also use a lot of my free time to study and research topics that I find interesting. So I don't have hobbies that are very time intensive. I don't golf. That's a popular one that is very time consuming.
Yeah, no, that's good. I was just thinking, I guess I probably listen to 5 to 10 podcasts a week, and I feel like I'm spending absolutely as much time as I can in that learning style for work related items. And I was like, it sounds like you do at least as much too. You know, I have to change where I listen. One was I was listening when I drive. Now it's I listen when I work out because we're at home and I can wear headphones and headsets at my house where I can't at the gym. But you know, I love the breadth of the different areas that you're talking about learning and gaining information. I think that's really, really useful for expanding your effectiveness in the company that you're at. And I guess I wanted to talk to you too and I'd rather hear you talk about ways you've achieved success in learning at a large global company. You've got people all over the globe at your current company. You've had other experiences as well. What's worked, and what can you share on that?
Yeah, I think learning is extremely important in some of those areas that we talked about. Another one I would say is learning from your peers is extremely important. So other Treasury peers you have. LinkedIn is a great tool, and using those connections and giving them a call or sending them an email, finding out what they're up to, what they're prioritizing, what their challenges are, and developing those give and take relationships. It's all about relationships. Another way to learn, and what I've done at Fluor, as you mentioned, is built relationships across the company. And I think that's one of the most important pieces of communication and learning that I've done at Fluor. So, instead of the typical tax, FP&A, accounting, legal, those teams that we as treasurers tend to build relationships with, I spend a lot of time expanding out of finance and into the business. So I have relationships with engineers, project controls, directors of our mega projects, procurement and contract managers. We have a huge team there, and it's an important business function. We have construction leaders and IT, and then we have innovation and transformation. So I spend a lot of time developing relationships, across the business. I really think that developing those relationships and getting outside of Treasury and finance are what allows treasurers to really be a lot more effective and add a lot more value to the business. So I spent quite a bit of time doing that, and kind of my approach is, relationships are key, and I say humility is extremely important. So you need to be smart enough to know that you aren't that smart, and be confident enough to embarrass yourself, and that's kind of a balance there. And if you have a servant's heart, for one, you'll be a much happier person in your entire life, not just in your business life, and you'll build a lot more relationships. You'll have, both at work and in your personal life. One thing is, don't have that corporate ivory tower mindset, which I think is it's going away. But, back in the old days, I think that was a lot more prevalent. But, if you understand that your role in Treasury is to serve everyone across the organization, and you take that mindset to it, I think you'll be really successful at building good relationships across the business.
I think one of the things when you had mentioned in that other podcast, you talked about the humility, a servant's heart, that idea of how can you help the other areas. I don't know if there's any additional things you can say on that, but that was pretty impactful, because instead of I'm from corporate and you do what I say, it's, how can I learn about your business? What can we do to make you more successful? That seems so strategic and helpful versus, viewing you as an external auditor.
Yeah, taking the time to understand different business functions and what they do and building that trust. Trust is key. So they understand that you're not coming in from a corporate role and trying to find out what they're doing to see, what's wrong and how are you going to share their information and their role and what they're doing, but build that trust and know that, help them understand that you're there you really value what they bring to the business, and you're really interested in what they do, and you're interested in how you can help them. So again, that servant's heart is, how can you help them? How can you collaborate with them? And where are the areas that they're having challenges with, and what you might be able to help them with? And if it's not you, who do you know across the business or externally that you think they may, want to talk to that might be able to help them in a certain area?
As we're in the midst of COVID-19 lockdown and, obviously companies and people are doing different things, in addition to learning, but on this relationship side of things, how has the investment you've made in relationship been paying dividends in times of stress?
It's being able to call somebody up and have them answer the phone, right? When you have that relationship and they know you, and they know you're not calling with negative intentions. You're calling to be helpful, and maybe you have questions, right? At times like we're experiencing right now, there's a lot of impacts to a lot of businesses, and cash flow forecasting. There's more questions, I would say, across the world in different businesses. There's more questions than answers right now, and so a lot of teams are getting a lot of phone calls from different parts of the business, and if you have those relationships and you have that trust, and they're liable to take your calls and to be open about, hey, this is where we're at, this is what we know right now, this is what we're working on, this is what we think may be the impacts, and then it gives you a chance to offer, here's how I might be able to help you from my seat in the business, and how we might be able to collaborate together to get to the right answer faster, develop plans to react under different scenarios. A lot of it right now is scenario building, but having those relationships is key if you want to be effective, especially at times like this when people's schedules are packed and we're working around the clock to try to understand the impacts to the business.
Yes, it's not everyone may be working from home, but there seems to be more work and more conversations to have. But with the relationship management side of things and relationships and learning, sometimes learning involves tough questions or tough situations. Things are deteriorating, or investments need to be moved and reallocated to other areas. Is there anything you can share about asking tough questions? What can you do? How can you learn when you have to ask, some of the harder questions?
Yeah, I think that comes back to having those relationships. And if you have those relationships and you have that trust, you can be very open, and you can be straightforward, and you can ask some of those tougher questions, and the intentions are known. That you have good intentions with your questions or your recommendations, and if you take the time to explain the why, and you do a lot of listening, right, to understand. No one has all the answers, and so that's how we learn and grow from each other is by listening. But so you have to be humble. But at the same time, you have to lead without fear and live without regret. So never a good time to do the wrong thing, and there's never a bad time to do the right thing. As someone has said, I can't take credit for it, but it's a mantra that I live by. And so it's a balance of that to be effective and to ask the tough questions and get get the right answers.
Yeah, I think that sounds fascinating and interesting too, as a way to build the relationship, but learn throughout the process. Todd, as we draw to the end of the podcast recording, I was wondering if you had any final thoughts about learning or even relationships to leave with our listeners.
My mantras and my advice are they haven't changed in recent history. So it is, again, just have a plan for be intentional with what you want to learn, and eat the right foods, eat healthy, and know how you learn, and so you can be more effective at how you consume data and retain data. But it's just, be humble, be smart enough to know you don't know everything, and live without fear, and you'll live without regret. And then I like Wayne Gretzky's quote that you miss every shot you don't take, so don't be afraid to take the shot and get involved.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Todd, so much for sharing your insight and thoughts on a career built to being an intentional learner. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.